I'm you from the future. I completed every Final Fantasy except one. You forgot one. My plan is to hand-deliver this version of Final Fantasy VI directly to you in the past, and then take your place after that review and finish the one that you missed. That's what I'm gonna do. You can't stop me. Alright. And then they made Final Fantasy VII after that, which we'll be reviewing next. So tune into that. Who's that? I hope that's not me from the future. Oh, thank God. I'm you from the future. You messed up, man. You gotta review Chrono Trigger. You have to do this. It's the only way. I'm from the future where you complete every Final Fantasy game and you fail because you missed Chrono Trigger. It's part of the Final Fantasy Chronicles collection. It counts. It counts. Alright, so play Chrono Trigger. Alright, bye. Chrono Trigger. Alright, so we gotta settle something. Right off the bat, I'm not going to play any games here. Is Chrono Trigger a Final Fantasy game? No. Why is this part of the series? Chrono Trigger is a very interesting beast. It is one of a kind. That's why people love it so much. It's very famous. You've heard of it. You've probably played it. It is one of the most interesting developer crossovers in gaming. And yeah, we really have never seen anything like it. It's got Sakaguchi, you know, the main Final Fantasy guy, but it's got also the Dragon Quest guy. I forget his name, but this is not a Dragon Quest show. And then on top of that, Akira Toriyama. And they called themselves the Dream Team. Could you imagine that? Like, most people don't refer to themselves that way. Like, that's for other people to give them that name. Especially in Japan. Japan is all about, like, having honor and, like, not being prideful and everything. But no, these guys were like, we're the Dream Team. This is called the Dream Project, Chrono Trigger. And it almost didn't happen for many different reasons. Even the producer of Square had to like come in and make sure it happened because there was so much potential. And oh man, they did it. They lived up to it. A lot of people consider Chrono Trigger to be part of the Final Fantasy universe, not like the literal universe. Well, some people do. There are theories. Because, I mean, think about it. There's 15, 16 mainline games. None of them are actually connected. So, like, so much of Chrono Trigger, it's the same. It's got the active battle system. It doesn't have Sid. You know, I was really hoping for a Sid update, but I didn't get that. It does, however, have a Biggs and Wedge. Biggs and Wedge make an appearance. I don't do updates for those. Those guys came in, like, with the last game, Final Fantasy VI, this was the last one I reviewed, right? And they appear in games to follow. They also appear in Chrono Trigger, so there's a little connection there. There were debates on if this is considered part of the Final Fantasy canon. Is there even going to be a sequel? Which there was, Chrono Cross. But then on the PS1, Square started to re-release things to find new audiences, give people another chance, bring stuff to the West that wasn't in the West. We got the Final Fantasy Anthology, which had 6 and 5. And they're like, we also need to bring 4. What do we pair with 4? We already paired 5 and 6. So, shortly after the release of Final Fantasy IX, and before the next project, Square released Final Fantasy Chronicles, which contained Final Fantasy IV and Chrono Trigger. So regardless of everything I just said, the one rule that this series follows. Is Final Fantasy in the title? The answer is yes. Final Fantasy Chronicles makes Chrono Trigger part of this series. And there's no more arguing, because I make the rules. So let's move on. I played this game on Steam, because for the longest of times, the definitive version of this game was considered to be on DS. And that game got really expensive, because it was never re-released until, like, fairly recently, a couple years ago, where Steam got a port. And there was a mobile port, and they were both terrible. The reviews on Steam, you can still see a bunch of negative stuff, but over the years, they've patched it, they fixed it up. It's just about the best experience now. It's got all the stuff the DS had. The Final Fantasy Chronicles re-release that I talked about added these anime cutscenes from Akira Toriyama, which is awesome, and they're great to see. I've never seen an episode of Dragon Ball, but I gotta say, Akira Toriyama has a cool style, but man, it's just like, all the male characters just look like Goku. Is that just me? Yeah, is that offensive to say? Like, people are gonna be like, how dare you say that about the greatest anime, the biggest anime? I don't know, dude, I look at Chrono and I'm like, are you sure that's not Super Saiyan, Mega Super Saiyan 2 Super Saiyan? Because he's got red hair, it's red hair Goku, that's what he is. But it doesn't matter, you don't really see the anime side too much. There's still the sprites, it's still a Super Nintendo game. You also got Frog. Who's a frog? Cool name, great name. Ayla, who is the cave lady. Obviously you time travel, you go to different eras and you find different people, it's great. Luca, scientist girl, also looks a little bit like Bulma, with purple hair and glasses, sorry. And then finally you have Robo, the robot. They're really great with names in this game. The one thing with Robo is his theme song, it sounds so much like Rick Astley, Never Gonna Give You Up. It sounds so much like that, I can't get that out of my head. And you're a ragtag crew going on adventures through time, and you gotta jump around in all the different eras to stop Lavos. What is Lavos? He's like a giant bug. The point is he's gonna destroy the world, and the wrong people are gonna use his power to rule it afterwards, even though it's gonna be like a crater after that. So what are you really ruling? Which is something I was wondering about. Point is, world's gonna explode, you gotta stop it. It's a pretty simple story for Final Fantasy type stuff as far as that goes. Like, it doesn't really overcomplicate itself. It doesn't make you second guess. It doesn't introduce another villain halfway through. It doesn't do any of that. Like, you gotta stop Lavos, so do it. Figure out all these steps. And we'll get to a bunch of different things later with the story, but right now, just characters. Another interesting thing, Chrono is a silent protagonist, which is the first in this series. I think maybe the first one they didn't talk, but nobody talked, so that doesn't really count. But even the second game had character names and dialogue and stuff, and Chrono does not speak in this. And that was kind of jarring, considering all these games I've played already. But I never knew what the guy was thinking. Like, am I supposed to put myself into this role? And I guess I did, and then, yeah, he doesn't have much of a character, because he doesn't talk. I think it's a hot debate in the Chrono Trigger community. Should Chrono be speaking or not? Well, he doesn't, and that's just how it is. I didn't really consider it to be a bad or good thing. That's just what they decided to do, and that's fine. The other characters in this game are great. The game plays pretty well too. The biggest thing you'll notice coming off of Final Fantasy, especially the Super Nintendo games, is that there's no random encounters. That's huge. Even in the overworld, I can't tell you how much I hate overworld, because you just go to the overworld to travel. You're just trying to get to a place, man. Like, half the time, you can't even justify the bad guys being there as, like, good for you to grind levels or anything, because they're weak at a certain point in the game. You revisit an old area and you're like, I'm fighting these battles, I'm not getting anything out of it, I'm just trying to travel. None of that. Also, doesn't need to be said, but the music in this game is amazing. And another thing that bothers me with random encounters is I'm listening to the music and then it cuts, gotta go into a battle. That's frustrating as hell. So in the overworld, which has some of the best music in the game, I just listen to it. I just get to listen to it and walk and go on my way. It's wonderful. And within the areas, the battles aren't random. This isn't a perfect situation though. Remember Final Fantasy Mystic Quest? Maybe not, because it's not a very memorable game. But my biggest complaint with that one was how boring it was. There were no random encounters in that game either, but the vast majority of the game was just fighting anyway, because they specifically put them one here, one here, one here, one here, and you just like have to fight them. There's no avoiding it. I guess you could maybe run, and some points of this game get to that level a little bit, because the game is easy. It's not Mystic Quest easy. I don't mean to compare it to Mystic Quest, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I offended you. But the battle system is fairly simple. And for point-to-point small battles with small fry, I'm not gonna do super attacks. I'm not gonna waste my MP. I'm just gonna go. There is an auto button in this version. There's no speed up, unfortunately. But there is an auto battle. So, worst case scenario, I turn auto on, everybody just attacks, and I just like check my phone while it happens. Like, that happened a decent amount, because I didn't feel the need to use text. Maybe it would have gone faster, but I wanted to conserve. So, I guess one complaint I have about this game is the somewhat boring battles. This game could have used a speed up. That's the thing. It's not an inherent problem with the game, really, because if they port this game again and add in a speed up option, it's fixed. I got no problem plunging through all these guys with a ×3 speed or something like that. That would be nice. Otherwise, I don't think this game really needs to be remade at all. It is nearly perfect the way they execute everything else in this game. Let's talk about battles. So you have techs in this game, and that's pretty much your secondary option. You can attack or tech. Tech is magic, but also abilities. Some games separate them. Some games conjoin them. This game conjoins them. And every character has MP that they use for abilities or magic. You can teach almost all the characters different statuses, different elements of magic. So you got the water, lightning, shadow even. Everybody gains levels regardless of whether or not they are your 3 party members that you're fighting with. Everybody is pretty much at the same level throughout the whole game, which is lovely because I can use whoever I want when I want. Which is one of my problems with a lot of these games, is that the customization ends up hurting the experience sometimes. Not this one. You can do whatever you want. The main thing you gain from actually using them in battle is tech points to learn more techs. And this isn't a game where you can choose which techs they learn. Each character has their techs that they will learn in that order, and the last one they learn is going to be the best one. So if you don't use a character for the whole game, you're probably not going to see their best attacks, but that's the only thing you'll miss out on. If you want to use them again, you still can, and they're not going to die in battle because they're underleveled. I was totally fine with that, because that way you can pick who you really want to focus on, and use other people when you feel the need to. You could also, speaking of switching parties, you can do that at any time. How wonderful is that? Maybe my biggest complaint with Final Fantasy VI, how much of a boring, tedious mess it was to swap equipment, change party members. You have to go here, you have to do that, you have to switch one by one by one by one. And learning abilities was annoying to manage as well. This game fixes all of that. It's simpler, I guess, is the payoff, but that doesn't bother me. It actually took me a while to even figure it out. Like halfway through the game, I was like, wait, can I go to party menu right here? I'm not at a save point. Am I allowed to do that? And then I switched party members, used that guy to heal my guys, and then switched him back. And I was like, I can do that? That feels like I'm cheating. One gimmick that the battle system has is positioning. There's no battle screen. You run into an enemy, and you fight right there. And that's really cool too, just from an immersion perspective. For each battle in the entire game, there's a set point that your players are going to sit, and they program that for every single battle, which is kind of nuts. And you have certain attacks, like there is for Chrono and Frog, their joint attack is like a cross-section attack. Wherever Frog is and wherever Chrono is, they're going to cross there. And whichever enemies they hit in that path will be hit with this strong attack. Some attacks are like an AoE thing. So positioning and where your guys are, it matters. But I will say, when they taught me that mechanic, I was into it. And then the majority of the game didn't really use that very much. Like that cross-section attack I talked about, I used like twice. It's cool on paper. I don't think it was actually executed that well. In battles, I'm almost never considering, oh, these guys are positioned in such a way I can do this. It's mostly just like if they're clumped together, I can use that AoE attack. I almost only used those because it wasn't worth really thinking about anything else. So maybe a little bit of a complaint there too. The simple gameplay could turn some people off, but I will say this is a very, very good entry-level game. Especially considering Mystic Quest is on the same console and it advertised itself as that. But that is just a boring mess that'll turn you off from JRPGs. Chrono Trigger is the way to go if you haven't played any of these kinds of things. Like it's wonderful. I'm not gonna go too hard into story, but I do want to talk about side quests. There's a few of them. There's a decent amount of them. And this game works similarly to 6, where at a certain point, like the Act 3 happens, and then the game is open, and you can go to the end, but you can like do a bunch of other things first. And I highly recommend you do that, because that's some of the best points of the game. For me, these little side quests focus on basically each party member, and they all have a little story they go through. I think my favorite one was like the future. You can go to the future where the world's destroyed, like the bad guy won, which is just a cool concept in general. And you can bring a little seed to there and you can present it to somebody and they're like, oh, it's a little plant. What's a plant? And you can tell them to destroy it or plant it. Why would you tell them to destroy it? I don't know. Or you can go to the past and tell them to plant a seed too. The point is, there's this lady who's going to devote her life to like growing back a forest, to like bring life to this area, this desert again. This is going to take forever. This is going to take hundreds and hundreds of years. I guess I'm going to be dead. There's no one else around to be able to do this. And then Robo is like, I'm a robot. I've stuck around for thousands of years. I lived through it. You guys could just leave me and go into the future and I'll work on this for the next 400 years or whatever. And none of the characters dwell on it. It doesn't like hype up an emotional goodbye or anything, but I was like hit by that. I was like, but Robo, you won't see us for 400 years. Are you sure? He's just like, I'm going to do it. And you go outside and he starts farming. He's like shoveling around on the desert. You're like, goodbye, I guess. And you go into the future and the whole place is a forest. And it's like, I don't know, this feeling hits you of like, I missed out on 400 years of stuff. And it all just happened in a flash. The game does time travel super well. And it's so innovative in how it's done, because I don't think of a game that's ever done anything with time travel before this, at least not to this extent. And then I don't think of a game that's done stuff like this after Chrono Trigger either. Maybe Chrono Cross. And I'm just like, this is cool, the forest is here. Where's Robo? I gotta find Robo. And he's like in a church, and they like made him into like a monument of himself. And he's like shut down and rusted and everything. And it was like, is he dead? And you fix him up and you have like a nice scene by the fire where everybody talks about it. It's like, that was my favorite part of the entire game. And there's tons of quests like that. Like you gotta find this sacred stone that keeps getting stolen, so you have to like plant it in other places throughout time because you need to get it to the future, but you can't bring it with you. So it's just like really awesome gimmick. There's not a single side quest that's just a dumb thing you do for a second and you get gold or whatever. Everything has a good reward. And I think the year the world ends is like the end of 1999. So I don't know if that was like a reference to Y2K. When did this game come out? Was this a message about the future? The distant future, the year 2000? And there's this place, the end of time, where you have all the portals that you can go to all the different eras. And there's one portal that I've never been to, and I go over there. And it's just the final boss. And I'm fighting the final boss out of nowhere. I'm like 5 hours into the game. So apparently another thing this game did that was so groundbreaking, you could just fight the final boss like whenever you want. And depending on when you do it, you'll get a different ending? Whoa. And there's 13 different endings with subtle variant changes in the endings. Some not so subtle, depending on other actions you do throughout the game. Like they didn't just use time travel as a gimmick, like, ooh, you can go to prehistoric times and also the future. Like, no, the stuff you do matters throughout the game, throughout time. It's super cool. This probably blew minds as kids in the 90s were growing up with this game. This is one of the last major Super Nintendo games ever released. And I see it was a hot debate on the playgrounds of old in the 90s. What's better, Final Fantasy 6 or Chrono Trigger? You know, I like 6 a lot, but I do get hung up on those little things I mentioned in that video. And I think if you look at it from an objective, just like basic, the way the game works, what it innovated with, how simple and effective it is, I think Chrono Trigger's the better game. I think it changed. It did so much more that some games don't even do to this day. From what I heard this, I don't know if it's true, but this might be the first game that had NewGame Plus. They didn't add that into a port. Like, the original Chrono Trigger had a NewGame Plus, and if you play through the game again, you could get different endings. And your characters would be all powerful, and it's just like, first of all, pretending like this is a new concept. What a cool concept. You can play through the game with all your levels and equipment and all that stuff. That's so cool. We take that for granted nowadays. I don't usually play through a game again on NewGame Plus, but like, think about it. This is the first time it happened. I would have been like, that's so cool. Well, every game should do that. And then now we have every game doing that. I also know a lot of people who play this game like yearly. It's like a yearly, time for my yearly Chrono Trigger playthrough. I can see it. It's very replayable. It's shorter than like any of the Super Nintendo games. So obviously by extension the PS1 games as well. Some people complain about that, and I'm like, no, dude. 22 hours? Perfect. No need to be longer than that. It's also like the most well-paced of all these games that I've played. Pacing is a pretty big problem with Final Fantasy, to the point where I don't really care much about the pacing anymore. But like, this made me realize, yeah, those games don't really get started until like halfway sometimes. But not this one. You start time traveling, and all of a sudden this stuff keeps happening. The music, I rarely bring up music. Nobuo Uematsu didn't really do the music with this, he helped. It was another guy, Yasunori Masuda is his name, and my god, he's put his heart and soul into this. There's a bunch of story of his background. He almost died making this. Legit. Like, he got stomach ulcers from working so hard on this soundtrack to prove himself. And Nobuo Uematsu stepped in to finish the job, and a couple other composers apparently. I mean, Final Fantasy music is great, period. But every song in this was like a banger. It was like, I'm humming this, I can't get it out of my head. I got excited when I heard some of the tracks show up again. It feels like there's not a lot of tracks, but all of them are fantastic. And that's another difference between this and 6. And that's the thing with 6, is that it has these really great moments of music, but the overall, it's just pretty good. And Chrono Trigger is like all gas, no brakes. It keeps going. Story-wise, character-wise, side quests, gameplay. Gameplay does slow down with some of those battles being pretty samey. Even bosses, like, you do have to think for the bosses, but like, there's also a lot of bosses where the gimmick is just, I have 2 guys in front of me, and they're gonna heal me and do double attacks. So kill them first, and then me. And that's like the whole gimmick, which you've probably played before in a bunch of other games, but this game does it like many times. So that's like my main complaint, is that the battles can be a little boring, but I really don't have much else to say. It was just really good. It's a wonderful game, Chrono Trigger. Oh, wow. Breaking news, Chrono Trigger's good. It's time for me to go back to the future. Yeah. And like, Tom of this timeline is gonna review Final Fantasy VII next, so enjoy that. I'm gonna go back and oh god, and then the guy in the other timeline that I talked to in the last video, he's gonna review the next Final Fantasy, the future, the next generation. And me, I've already finished all the games. So you know what? I'm done. This is my last one. It's time to go to the future. All right, hit the music. I forgot my mask. Goodbye.